Before Korea was split into North and South Korea, it was occupied by the Japanese Empire from 1910 until 1945 when the Japanese Empire fell. Now, this entailed oppression for the Korean people. This includes the Korean people were forced to bow to Japanese soldiers whenever they were seen by Japanese soldiers or saw Japanese soldiers, and Japanese soldiers were also able to take food and other things from the Korean people without any negative implications for them, which they did fairly often. Now, many people just accepted this rule, but there was a small group of guerrilla fighters fighting the Japanese occupation. One of the leaders of that group was Kim Il-sung, which would go on who would go on to lead the North Korean government after the Korean War and during the Korean War. Now, another thing that the Japanese people did was they took Korean women and forced them into sex slavery for the soldiers and higher class people during and pre-World War One to keep morale up. After World War II, Korea was divided at the 38th parallel. North Korea was given to the communist USSR, and they instilled a communist government, and South Korea was given to the United States of America, which created a capitalist democratic government, who was led by Syngman Rhee, who was also affected and advised by General Douglas MacArthur. Now, the North Korean rule was not very good for the people, and during this time, many people left Soviet-controlled North Korea to get to the United States-controlled South Korea because they figured it would be a better country, and generally speaking, it was. The Korean War started in 1950 and started with a North Korean advance into South Korea. You can see that in the south of South Korea with the line that's all red labeling the furthest advance. And then South Korea got U.S. support and pushed all the North Koreans all the way back to that blue line at the top. Then they got pushed back again to about the middle, and that's basically where things stayed for about 3 years-ish until the fighting ended. The leader of South Korea at the time was Syngman Rhee, and the leader of North Korea at the time was Kim Il Sung. One problem with the truce at the end of the war was North Koreans demanded their soldiers that were POWs back, and those POWs did not want to return to North Korea. They wanted to stay in South Korea, but North Korea would not agree to a truce without getting those POWs. After the war, the DMZ was created, which stands for Demilitarized Zone, and the Demilitarized Zone is the area between is the border between North and South Korea, and it's actually one of the most heavily militarized areas in the world. After the Korean War, you could see the difference in communist versus capitalist rule in the Koreas. South Korea, you can see, is very brightly lit up with power, whereas in North Korea there isn't much power at all. Really, the only power is in Pyongyang, and there really isn't even much there. One thing that came with the North Korean government is the fact that they treated their leaders like gods almost. So when Kim Il sung died, they had a huge state funeral, and everybody was unable to control their emotions. Everyone was crying like crazy the whole time, and whether or not that was the real emotions, I really don't know. But it could be. It could just be the acts. Now, one thing that came of this whole power thing, and it's shown that is the kids and stuff outside of the city of Pyongyang are very poor, and a lot of them don't have parents, so they have to live as kochibi on the street. And kochibi are basically kids that steal from other people, homeless boys that steal from other people to survive. They basically steal food, money, and other things that they can sell. Um, and then this is one of the buildings. This is some of the buildings in a city called Gyeongseong, which I'm pretty sure that's how to pronounce it, which is where our book took place in. And you can see it's very dilapidated and not very well kept. Now, the funny thing about the children being so maltreated in the country, is the fact that there are propagandas that state that Kim Il Sung and Kim Jong Il really loved children, and that children were the future, so on and so forth. Yet they really just abandoned all the children outside of Pyongyang. And another thing is the North Korean government decided to build this 1,000-foot tall hotel building in Pyongyang, and they spent the money and resources to build that instead of fixing the infrastructure in the rural areas and providing food for the poor children. In modern times, North Korea is still a dictatorship. Kim Jong Un has full control of the um, country, and they have recently started focusing a lot of money and technology towards developing nuclear technology, and they have some successful nuclear weapons, missiles, and they've also had some failures. Now, people outside the cities of North Korea, as you can see, live in very rural areas and most of the time not the best land to live on and not the best infrastructure. And again, in Pyongyang, it is very nice. They try to paint a picture that North Korea is this amazing place with all these nice buildings and so on and so forth, and nice paved roads. That is the end of the documentary.